Today I want to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes designers make when they're working with grids in design project. And mistake number 1 is when using modular, column or combined grids, sometimes without really understanding what the grid is for and how it works. Some designers see the grid not as modules or columns, but just as bunch of lines. So they end up aligning elements not by the start or end of module, but by the spaces between columns or modules. Don't fall into this trap. Just remember, design objects should live inside the modules, and modules themselves can be combined as you need it. Mistake number 2 comes from what I see a lot. Showing the grid just because it looks cool or professional, because everyone else does it, without actually thinking about how the grid was used in the design. Often designers add grid overlay to their Behance case slides, but they didn't actually build the design on that grid. They just drew it there for the presentation. And honestly, it's super obvious and kind of funny. Designers turn the grid because they have to, but they don't really know why. Remember, the grid isn't decoration, it's a tool for organizing your design. Mistake number 3 is super common. Sometimes designers feel more confident. They have a rough idea of how grids work. But that's exactly the problem. It's just a rough idea. At this stage, a typical mistake is that instead of creating clear power lines, patterns and content hierarchy, designers just jump between columns and alignment lines. In one block, they align to first column, in another block to the second, and in the third to the third column. So if you look closely, there is a grid and elements seem to follow it, but there is no real logic or hierarchy in this design. The grid, the structure, just doesn't feel like it's there at all. What to do instead? Identify 1 or 2 power lines that your grid will rely on. Sure, some sections can break the rules here and there, and that's totally fine. But overall, stick to these lines. A well-designed grid also gives you a clear rules about where to place headings, subheadings, and body text. And it's the best not to break those rules either. Mistake number 4. A lot of designers take the rules way too seriously. Like there are some kind of unbreakable laws that absolutely must never be broken. And this usually leads to 2 problems. These designers often use the same exact grid for every project, without adapting it to different tasks or context. A media platform or a portfolio or a long text-heavy article, these are totally different projects with different content and needs. So the grid should be tailored accordingly. The second one. Sometimes you actually need to break the grid. It could be special blocks, accent elements, or sections with more detailed information. Trying to squeeze everything into the same old grid isn't always the answer. Breaking the rules is totally fine if it leads to more effective and striking design solution. Sometimes a designer takes the grid too literally, and once they find a composition that works, they just copy it everywhere. They forget about the rhythm and how people actually experience the site. This leads to a boring and crowded feeling. A good grid should always leave a room for variety, so you don't end up with monotonous and cluttered rhythm. By avoiding these mistakes, you will make your work with grids sharper, cleaner and more logical. Oh, by the way, what a luck! You can do it just that in Death Season 3 grids. In a few hours of video content, we packed all our experience working with composition and grids to create award-winning projects. We would be happy to see you join our community.